The World Food Programme says the economic impact of the pandemic could double the number of people facing acute hunger around the world. It's calling for urgent action to help those who need it the most.
One crisis after another. As the world still reels from the coronavirus pandemic, UN officials are warning that another catastrophe is right around the corner. Millions of people will go hungry this year as the impact of nationwide shutdowns and restrictions bites. Those who work in the informal sector could be hardest hit.
E para somar agora nessa questão da Covid, a gente tem agora mais 30 a 40 milhões de profissionais informais no Brasil inteiro que simplesmente do dia para a noite foram jogados para a extrema pobreza. Por quê? Por que do dia para a noite? Porque com a quarentena eles não podem trabalhar. Essas famílias nessa faixa de renda não têm crédito, não têm poupança e sem renda passam a não ter absolutamente nada para comprar os alimentos, a ter qualquer tipo de recurso para pagar suas contas.
The World Food Programme estimates the number of people suffering from hunger could go from 135 million to more than 250 million by the end of the year.
At the same time, while we're dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, we're also on the brink of a hunger pandemic. In my conversations with world leaders over the past many months, before the coronavirus even became an issue, I was saying that 2020 would be facing the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II for a variety of reasons. In a worst-case scenario, we could be looking at famine in about 36 countries. And in fact, 10 of these countries, we already have more than 1 million people per country who are on the verge of starvation.
Food security was already on the rise even before the pandemic, with many people going hungry in conflict zones such as Syria. Many were also suffering because of weather-related events, such as drought in South Asia and locust swarms in Africa.
These volunteers here in the Cotonou neighbourhood of Togba are a welcome sight. They're responding to a call for help that was posted on Facebook by the neighbours of this orphanage.
Because of the coronavirus, they no longer receive donations and the children have nothing left to eat. This was part of the aim of our initiative, which was to feed or give a little to people who have lost their source of income or can no longer eat because of the coronavirus.
The institution's biggest usual donor is based in Italy, but since the country's become one of the European nations worst affected by COVID-19, contributions to the Beninese orphanage have dried up. It's been 2 months since they received funding. The shelter is one of several affected in Benin, and the children are put further at risk by the closure of schools in response to the coronavirus pandemic.
What we lack the most is food, because all the children are at home and are currently consuming a lot. Before, they used to go to the school canteen.
Poorer families are suffering too. Benin didn't issue a coronavirus lockdown, but communities have become more cautious about interactions. Opportunities and desire for informal work have dried up.
Avant, il se débrouillait, bon, il peut aller sortir, aller faire des jobs quelque part, mais actuellement, il ne peut plus sortir. Les gens ont peur de la maladie. Quand on regarde à la télé, on voit on dit le nombre de morts très élevé, donc ils ont peur de mourir.
This father of 5 had to stop fishing in the channel after it was banned. He's tried to make a living sewing instead, but isn't sure he'll be able to recover from the financial damage. While waiting to receive the emergency aid promised by the government, those in need have no choice but to rely on the generosity of their fellow citizens. Thanks to food donations, volunteers can help the most extreme cases, but the list is long and is likely to get longer as the COVID-19 fight back continues.
Last month, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a significant package of social and economic measures to address the fallout from the country's COVID-19 lockdown. Now, to talk to us about the impact of COVID-19 on the poor, we're joined via Skype by Isabel Fry, who is the director of the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. A very good afternoon to you, Isabel, and thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, I mean, it's so clear now just how big that economic gap is between the rich and the poor in our country. Talk to us about how COVID-19 has really highlighted that and perhaps made things even worse.
Yes, indeed. We know that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. We also know that poverty levels pre the COVID-19 epidemic were unsustainable. 1 in 4 people was living below the food poverty line. 1 in 2 people was living under the upper bound poverty line. And that's exacerbated. We see that on a daily basis. We see the incredibly long queues of people queuing just for food, just for the ability to sustain themselves. And unfortunately, we've seen an apparent radio silence from the minister. We saw the initial announcement on the 21st of April by the president announcing that people would be able to receive far greater social security grants than there had been. Many of us saw that as being some kind of agreement that we needed to have an economic stimulus from below. But in addition to that, that government was listening to people's needs. And trying to ensure that they would not be further pushed into poverty. What we've seen from the Department of Social Development, as your last insert was showing, is just a huge amount of chaos. Firstly, there was a confusion about whether the child support grant top-up would go to every child. We then discovered that it was to the child support grant beneficiary, which legally is the caregiver. So instead of one caregiver of 3 children getting 3 top-ups, she or he would be eligible for 1. So that firstly was a huge chaos and led to a real concern amongst many people because there was no clarity coming from the minister. Secondly, we saw recently the payment of the child support grant and other grants fiasco. What we'd seen was that the department was saying that grants were going to be delayed. So generally the grant lasts for 2 weeks in every month. And instead beneficiaries were having to eke out a further 5 days. And then some of the SASSA payments ran out of money. And we also had the double payment of many beneficiaries. Now, it's still not clear whether or not those beneficiaries are going to be entitled to hold on to that money or would have to pay it back. And we know that when that's the only income into households, to pay it back is going to be irrevocable damage. So in addition to that, the minister, as I've said, has been very, very absent. Now, as social development, you would imagine that minister would be the caring face of the nation. I'm not sure whether that's a role reserved for Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, but we have not seen her coming forward. She's also been too busy to speak to the social partners in NEDLAC since the beginning of lockdown. And none of this really gives people who are living in starvation any real hope. We saw beneficiaries talking about the awful state of some of the food parcels, and yet social relief of distress food vouchers are not coming through. BASA, the Banking Association of South Africa, says that they are hamstrung because they receive all the information files from SASSA. Yeah. So at the beginning of the lockdown, having heard the president's announcement, I was very positive and said that really the ruling party was embracing social democracy. Right now, it seems that the poor are really getting forgotten.
Yeah, one of the biggest...
After hours of waiting, these cars finally pull up to this makeshift food bank in Las Vegas. Many of those in line have been laid off from their jobs in hospitality, a key sector in Sin City that's been ravaged by the coronavirus shutdown.
Being laid off, I'm still waiting on my unemployment. I've been waiting on unemployment like a month and a half.
Not making money that I was making. My wife, she's not working either.
Similar stories are playing out across the U.S. as the country grapples with an unemployment rate of 14.7%, the highest level since the Great Depression. The pandemic wiped out 20.5 million jobs in April alone, a staggering number that may be even higher, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS.
The April jobs report showed us that we lost over 20 million jobs over the course of April. But it's likely that is perhaps an undercount of the official number of job losses. The BLS noted that within those numbers, there might have been an undercount of as much as 5% for the unemployment rate.
While the tourism and service sectors have been hit especially hard, The BLS April jobs report shows that every industry has been impacted, including manufacturing and even healthcare, with low-wage workers, particularly women and people of color, bearing the brunt. President Donald Trump is pinning his hopes on a quick economic rebound, claiming that jobs will come back as the country reopens. But many analysts warn it may take years to recover.
Now, it's been reported that mercenaries from a Russian paramilitary organization are fighting in Libya. And now UN diplomats are confirming those reports. Well, it said that these mercenaries are backing the Libyan strongman Khalifa Haftar. Well, Moscow denies deploying the fighters, who are reported to be members of the so-called Wagner group, which it's thought has ties to President Vladimir Putin. Well, for more, we can speak to France 24's international affairs editor Armin Georgian. Armin, tell us a bit more about this Wagner group. Who are they?
Well, Wagner is a private security firm, and its contractors are said to be involved in Syria, Ukraine, and the Central African Republic. Now, according to this UN report, in Libya, Wagner has provided technical assistance to forces loyal to Marshal Haftar, and also providing specialized tasks such as counter-electronic measures. So it sounds like quite high-level expertise, and the UN's estimate is that this help has been a force multiplier. In simple terms, that means that it has allowed local forces to punch above their weight.
Okay, so how's Russia responding to all these reports then?
Well, these are not new claims, actually. The Tripoli-based government has talked about Wagner in the past, and a few months ago, President Erdogan of Turkey said that 2,000 contractors of Wagner were in, or mercenaries, were in Libya. And what are they doing there, he asked, to which he got an answer from Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for President Putin. Peskov said, well, Libya has become a magnet for mercenaries from many countries. So it wasn't a direct...
New York State has released some pretty startling statistics. They say that more than half of people who were hospitalized with COVID-19 acquired the disease while also complying with those social distancing lockdown restrictions.
Unemployment hit a record high 14.7%, with more than 20 million jobs lost in April. It's a hit the country expected, of course, and on Fox and Friends yesterday, President Trump says he's optimistic we will bounce back quickly.
We had the strongest economy in the history of the world, the strongest economy we've ever had, and we had to close it, which is artificial. We artificially closed it. Those jobs will all be back, and they'll be back very soon. And next year, we're going to have a phenomenal year.
So what are the next steps to jumpstart the economy? We have the best person to answer that question right now. Joining us now, the chair of the President's Revitalization Council, HUD Secretary, Dr. Ben Carson. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being on the program. You've got a big
pleasure.
Absolutely, friend of the show. If you have a big job on your hands, you had a meeting yesterday about it. What is top of mind for you as you tackle this task of revitalizing our economic engine?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to point out that, this economic crisis that we're experiencing right now was intentional, and it was on the back of an extraordinarily strong economy.
Yes.
In 2008, it was just the opposite. We had a very weak economy. So this is a different situation altogether. And it's very important that we not allow that economic infrastructure to be destroyed so that we can rapidly get back on that train again. So what we want to do is make sure that we preserve, particularly the small businesses. The small businesses are the backbone of the economy of this country. They employ the vast majority of Americans. And the longer, we stay shuttered, the more of those small businesses will die. So on the forefront of what we're thinking about is how do we make sure that we preserve the viability of those small businesses. And a lot of that has to do with using our brains intelligently, not allowing this virus to completely dominate us, but in fact, how do we control it and live with it until we have the ability to completely eliminate it. If we wait until it's all gone before we come out, our economy will be gone.
Absolutely right. Doctor, the president has laid out guidelines and then basically said, hey, states, it's on governors to manage their reopenings. But we see protests across the country, a lot of governors taking it really slow, a lot of big states where cities have cases but counties have none. How can you incentivize governors to actually allow people to responsibly reopen who are ready to do so? Their livelihoods are at stake. They don't want to bail out. They don't want another PPP loan. They want to open their doors because they know they can. Target's wide open. My small retailer isn't. What more can be done to actually make sure that happens?
Well, I think what we have to do is emphasize data and evidence. We have enough places that are opening under various circumstances that we can look at what has happened there, particularly when people are wise enough to follow the guidelines. Make sure that you keep your hands washed, be careful about what you touch, wear the mask where appropriate, continue to maintain the social distancing. When we do those things, it is eminently possible to go back to work, except for the people who are very vulnerable, the elderly people who have significant underlying problems that could interfere with their immune response. Obviously, those people we need to protect, and we need to make sure that the people around them understand the principles. But when that's the case, there's absolutely no reason that we can't go back. And governors, like anybody else, ought to be able to understand data when it's presented.
Absolutely. That is common sense. That is trust in the American people. That's letting people make their own risk calculations. Doctor, I wish you all the best. You have a huge job with massive consequences for our country. You've got the medical background as well as the economic side. Last word, real quick.
Say we have an enormous team. Virtually all the agencies in the United States government are involved. Everyone's contributing tremendously to this. And this is America, and we're going to get it done.
Amen. Keep the heat on those governors. A lot of them slow rolling. All right, Dr. Ben Carson, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Good news out of Dallas, Texas tonight. A local salon owner, her name, Shelley Luther. She was given a 7-day jail sentence, fined $7,000, all because she opened the doors to her business in spite of, quote, the local lockdown orders. Thank God today she was released from prison after some support from the governor, lieutenant governor, the AG of Texas. She joins us now. Shelley Luther, thank God you're free. How are you doing?
I'm doing a lot better now. Thank you so much.
When the judge said to apologize, we had your boyfriend on last night, said it reminded me of William Wallace in Braveheart. The prisoner would like to speak a word. You need to apologize. What were you thinking when he said you need to apologize to the politicians? I was like, what?
I don't, I think he was referring to Clay Jenkins, the, county commissioner. That was the last thing I was going to do, honestly, because the way that he has acted during this entire thing is just ridiculous. So I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to apologize.
Good. I admire your courage. How was jail? Well, I'm sure it wasn't pleasant. And I heard there's coronavirus in that jail.
It's definitely not pleasant, but fortunately, I had a cell by myself. It had a rec area that had other individuals in there. The worst thing was that I didn't get to call anybody when I got there the whole first night. And that's kind of scary because I have, a daughter that just turned 17 at home. And if my boyfriend wasn't there to talk to her or anything, I wouldn't have come home and she wouldn't have known where I was.
That's pretty scary. Tell us why you decided to open and what measures for safety did you take?
Well, it wasn't, we were shut down March 22nd, so it had been several weeks that, the government was kind of telling us the money was coming. And the Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins kept pushing back the date of when we would open weeks out in advance before even, hearing any new comings of what was going on with masks or whatever. And when he finally pushed it back a final time, I just woke up one day and I said, I have to open. My stylists are calling me. They're not making their mortgage. I was at right now, I still am not caught up. I'm 2 months behind on my mortgage. And my stylists were telling me that they wanted to, what do you think if I go underground and go to people's houses? And I just said, that's not a good idea because we can't control the environment there. We don't know if it's been disinfected or anything like that. And I just decided I would open to create a safe place for the stylists and to make sure that I wasn't the reason they weren't making money.
Which I had heard you did. This thing is real. I'm in New York. I see this from a different perspective. When you opened, were you all wearing masks? Are you planning to wear masks? How do you plan on doing it? Because I saw, I was actually impressed with Georgia. They have these nail salons. They have the plexiglass. Everyone's in masks and gloves. You were using all of that, I heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we weren't using, we tried to use the gloves at first, and that's kind of hard for the hairstylists. Right. The nail techs, of course, did. But we made sure that I had no clients waiting inside the salon at all. So I had chairs sit 6 feet apart outside of the salon, so we had no one waiting. And when a stylist was ready, wearing a mask, of course, we didn't let any clients come in without a mask. They instantly sanitized their hands. The hairstylist sanitized their hands. They came in, they did the cut, and that person left. And
with a mask on,
there were no magazines in there, no drinks.
Let me ask you this.
Of course, yeah, everybody had to wear a mask to come in.
How many people work for you?
They don't work for me, but I usually have about 19 stylists in there at a time.
I'm going to make a donation to your shop. I want you and your workers to at least get over the hump. You can pass that on to our producers. I'm sorry you've had to go through that. I'm glad you're free. And we're praying that everything can open safely soon. And you showed a lot of courage. You're an inspiration.
Thank you so much.
Democrats appear to be narrowing the gap in Senate races across the country. Republicans currently hold a 3-seat advantage, but going into November, they have nearly double the number of seats at risk. Election experts believe races in Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, and Maine could decide whether Republicans hang on to their majority. The latest FEC filings show a number of Democratic challengers outraised Republican incumbents in the first quarter, and several other GOP seats that were once considered safe may now be coming into play. Larry Sabato joins me now. He is the director of the UVA Center for Politics and author of The Kennedy Half Century. Larry, very good to see you again. Why are these 4 races that we mentioned the ones to watch?
Basically, it's because the Democrats have strong candidates in all 4 of those races, and the states either already lean slightly Democratic, as in the case of Colorado, or it's a near tie once you look at all the polls as a group. Now, we're 6 months from Election Day, but I would say those 4 races are the basic 4, though there are others coming into play, as you mentioned.
So what actually needs to happen for Democrats to take control of the Senate?
Well, since it's 53-47, the Democrats would either have to pick up a net 4 seats to carry control of the Senate if they lost the presidency. I think it's unlikely. If the Democrats are winning the Senate, they're probably winning the presidency. Or they just need 3 net seats if Joe Biden is elected president, because he would bring in his vice president who would break ties in the Senate. It would be 50-50, the VP breaking ties, much as Dick Cheney did for a while back in 2001 for the Republican. We got to remember there's a seat that complicates things for the Democrats. It's Alabama. Now, I don't think anybody a few years ago thought Alabama would ever have a Democratic senator again, but sure enough, a Democrat was elected to succeed Jeff Sessions. He's up for election in this cycle, and that is a tough, tough race for the Democrats. The Republicans will have the edge no matter who's nominated.
Well, if Democrats don't win the so-called core 4, what other seats do they have a chance of picking up?
Well, there are several around the country. You know, Georgia has a double race. Both seats are on the ballot because of a resignation. And we'll have to see how it plays out. I think one of them is potentially vulnerable, but that assumes the Democrats are able to either carry or come very close to carrying Georgia in the presidential contest. Suppose Joe Biden picks Stacey Abrams, who was nearly elected governor of Georgia back in 2018. She might be able to strengthen the position of one of the Senate candidates.
And you touched on this a moment ago, but just underscore for us once again. So going through the different scenarios here, if Democrats only manage to win 3 seats, they could still take back the Senate. But that, of course, hinges, as you noted, on the Democrats winning the presidential election because of a VP here. Walk us through that scenario once more.
Yes, and you're absolutely right about that. It's a little confusing for people. Democrats have 47 seats now. They have to pick up a net 3 to even have it at 50-50. And to control a 50-50, they have to have the vice president. In other words, Joe Biden has to be elected president. So there are a lot of ifs in there. A year ago, I don't think many people thought the Democrats had a path to do that. Now they do. We can see how it might gel, how it might come together. A lot of things have to break right for the Democrats, and obviously we're waiting to see what happens with the pandemic and how quickly or not quickly the economy recovers. These things matter in the Senate just as they do in the presidential race.
Well, you noted some changes in the Senate map this week. A couple of states that were GOP strongholds you're now rating as likely Republican. Tell us about that.
Sure. We moved 2 that surprised people. One was Alaska. And again, you pretty much assume Alaska's voting Republican for president and probably for both of the Senate seats. But occasionally they have a Democrat in the Senate. The Democratic nominee, which really isn't a Democratic nominee, is an independent with the support of Democrats. He's doing better in fundraising. He's doing better in gaining attention. The Republican incumbent, Dan Sullivan, is not that well known, despite his years in the Senate. I don't think it's likely to happen, but it appears to be a little more competitive than anybody thought it was going to be. Now, one that everyone knows is South Carolina, because Senator Lindsey Graham is one of the most famous senators. His race has actually become a bit closer. We still have it as likely Republican. The Democratic candidate, Jamie Harrison, is known and very popular among Democrats in and out of South Carolina. He's been active in the party for a long time. And Lindsey Graham has been very controversial, even with some Republicans who don't like Donald Trump. He's kind of flipped on Donald Trump, obviously, and now is for him as opposed to against him in 2016. And the Democrats really resent his strong support of Donald Trump. So is it likely to happen? No. That's why we have it likely Republican. But we like to focus people on races that deserve more attention than they're getting.
Well, Election Day is still 6 months away. There's so much uncertainty regarding this coronavirus pandemic that we're all in the midst of right now. Is it clear at this particular moment how the government's handling of this pandemic could potentially impact these critical Senate races?
Well, yes, to a certain degree. It's the pandemic itself. That's half of it. The fact that we're seeing so many more deaths than were originally predicted, and we don't know how high it will go. We hope there's not even one more, but let's be honest about this. It's moving up daily. And I think that has upset people and terrified people in many places. But the pandemic connects directly to the economy, which is always central to presidential elections. Donald Trump had a great economy in January. Everybody thought that was going to speed his reelection. Now it looks as though, as of Friday, we'll have an unemployment picture that's as bad as in the 1930s and 1940s. Trump has to hope for a quick recovery. Most of the economic analysts don't think that's possible. But I always tell people to be careful, as we weren't in 2016. The truth is, on January 1st of this year, there was not one single person, at least analyst in this country, who said that the presidential election would be determined by a pandemic. I mean, who imagined this? It's a black swan event. And there could be another black swan event before November. So we all have to be patient, cautious, careful.
Really sage advice. Larry Sabato for us. Larry, great to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.